Okay, welcome. Today I wanted to do a little reflection about Paris Hilton and boarding school syndrome. So, enjoy. Okay, so today I thought I'd do a little reflection about Paris Hilton and boarding school syndrome, having just watched the film called This Is Paris, her documentary. So yesterday I've been posting videos about boarding school syndrome for about 5 or 6 years now. And one of the comments on one of my videos, someone said to me about this idea of emotional growth boarding schools. And I'd not heard of this before. And my reply was something to do with along the lines of, I would never have put emotional growth and boarding school in the same sentence. I personally went to boarding school for 7 years and I didn't feel I grew emotionally at all. In contrast, I really felt I shut down emotionally, repressed my emotions. So this person said, I also went to an emotional growth boarding school, and so did Paris Hilton. And I'd heard about her documentary. I didn't really know very much about Paris Hilton, if I'm honest. I'd heard the name, but I didn't really know who she was. And so last night with my wife, I watched the film, and I think it's fascinating. And I thought what I'd do today is I'd just kind of go through a few notes I've got about, what boarding school syndrome is, and then, these common traits and how, as she kind of talks about in her film, about how some of the qualities that she presents are linked into boarding school syndrome. So, first of all, I mean, in the film at the beginning, she's talking about her life, and she's talking about how she is, she works really, really hard, and she has this realization about boarding school. So I believe she's in her late 30s. And she went to boarding school not for a long time. I think it was just for possibly a year, maybe a couple of years when she was older. A lot of the people that I work with personally, my clients, have been to boarding school quite a young age. So 6, 7, 8, or I went to boarding school age 11. Whereas it seems like this emotional growth boarding school is certainly around Paris Hilton's time. They were going 16, 17, and it was mainly for children who were going off the rails. Parents didn't know what to do, and they were sending them to these places which were essentially very abusive. And it sounds like Paris Hilton, she received a lot of trauma there. And it sounds like, and this is why the film is fascinating, I find, is because at the beginning you see this woman who's very driven, it's kind of the social media, she has this facade. And, in my own experience of boarding school, this is very common, is that we create this persona to survive. And she says very clearly that, I certainly didn't have this in my boarding school, but she was saying that she had solitary confinement where she'd be stuck in a room and they would take her clothes off her and she would have to sit in there for 20 hours just on her own in the darkness. And, it was during these times when she was in solitary confinement. I mean, it's like prison or something out of you'd see the World War II movies. She would say that this is when she visioned that I want to make something of my life. I want to be so big and I want to be so popular that it's like basically, don't know the words, but, just basically putting her fingers up at these people going, I've made something of myself. So it's like this persona that she's put across to be very powerful and, famous has come from this real wounding of being abused physically, emotionally, and mentally in this place. And so that really helped me. And I think this is key, is hearing someone's story, realizing, God, the reason she's like she is because of what she went through as a child. And in my own work with people, I help my clients to release the trauma that they felt in boarding school. And she talks in her film about having these nightmares, and of people coming in the middle of the night and taking her out of her house, and having these nightmares. And it's every night. She's really struggling to sleep. And often my clients come to me and they too have insomnia, ex-boarders. And it's this inability almost to switch the mind off. And Paris Hilton, again, she talks about this. She talks about how that she struggles to switch off. She goes for the first holiday in the film to Mykonos, and she's again struggling to switch the mind off. And it's boarding school. And I was I'm writing my second book about boarding school at the moment, called How to Heal from Boarding School Syndrome. And in it, I was reflecting that most of my time at school, I felt in fear. And this is similar to what she's saying. She's like this fight or flight or freeze, fawn response, that she was in fear a lot. She's kind of really watching and wary, doesn't trust people. And she says, I still have that in my life now. I still don't trust people. So it's interesting to see how many of her traits that she has now have come from this kind of from this experience at boarding school. And although, yes, it wasn't very long, it was sufficiently traumatic that it totally changed the course of her life. She talks at the beginning how she loved, animals. You could imagine her becoming a vet or someone involved with animals, because that was her passion. But after boarding school, her trajectory totally changed. It's like, right, I'm going to make something of myself. So, so I'll just go through some of the symptoms really of boarding school, which are common for people, and then just kind of relate it into her story. So, the first one really is about emotional intimacy, struggling to connect to others. That's one of the, it brings anxiety up. And having, worked with people and been off to conferences, often it's like we have this ability to be financially successful. We might have good careers. We might, be physically very healthy, but emotionally, that's where we really struggle. And interestingly, in the film, this seems to be what Paris Hilton's struggling with. She has a relationship, a couple of relationships which don't work. And it's this struggle, trusting people, this struggle with emotional intimacy. So I really see that in the film, that, oh yeah, this is a common trait with ex-boarders. The next thing is about not being able to switch off. That is a common trait, the mind going, kind of planning. I kind of call, and Rod Boothroyd in his book about the archetypes, he says, we have this aspect which is the risk manager. And I see that ex-boarders have this part of our minds which is always on, looking for risk, seeing how we can stay safe. So that again, she's unable to switch off. She really struggles to sleep with an insomnia. The next thing is really controlling, perfectionist. That's common for ex-boarders. And again, she's talking about that she's very controlling. At one instance, she's got this new boyfriend and she's putting cameras all around her room to keep an eye on him. And this is very similar for ex-boarders, is we're very controlling. Things have got to be done a certain way. And partly that's because we have this rigid routine throughout our lives at boarding school, which was like, you have to do this, get up at 7, breakfast 7:30, 8 o'clock, cubicle inspection, So again, I've spoken about this. You function well on a career or financial level, but not on an emotional plane. Another thing is like feeling like a failure, or at least feeling really scared of being seen as a failure. And she talks about this a bit in her film. She says, I was going to get to 100 million, but then I'm going to go for 1 billion now, and then I'll rest. When I get to 100 million, I'll stop. She's like, oh no, I'm then going to go to 1 billion. And it's this sense of, for me, of not being enough. This rather than enjoying what I do have and being joyful in, the abundant life I do have. It's this sense of it's not enough. So again, she's talking about the next aspect is about feeling out of touch with your own needs. In the film, her sister is asking her to go on holiday, to have a break. And she's like, I don't do that. I've just got to keep going, keep going, keep going. And even at the end of the film, after all the processes, they say, are you going to step back? And she's like, no, I'm just going to keep going. So I feel this is really important for us, is sometimes we can understand it on a conscious level with boarding school, but we need to actually do the unconscious work, which I feel is, this is some of the work I do with my clients. We've got to work on those unconscious patterns. Otherwise, we just keep repeating them. So this is, essentially her, about feeling out of touch with her own needs. She just works and works. She's traveling all the time, and she's always giving to others and doing stuff. But she's not kind of really working out what is important for her. So this was very much me as well. I was always wanting to give to others, and partly I gave because I hated myself so much. What else? Do you feel like you aren't really happy or joyful? Have you forgotten how to play or let your hair down and have fun? And I think, that for me, she talks about that she enjoys doing her DJing. She feels that's when she's really connected. But she has all of these things. She has all of these things around her, but she says they're not important to her. And that playfulness, that you can see in her early life, that she's kind of lost how to connect to that. Another question is, do we often feel alone even when we're in a group of people? That's another boarding school syndrome thing. So again, workaholic. Feel, she says she's a workaholic. Addictions. She doesn't talk about addictions in this, but that's another common boarding school trait, syndrome. What other ones? I think it just talks about relationships, but she struggles to commit to a relationship. And there seems to be, as she speaks, she's not found the right person, but she works so hard that she doesn't actually have the time for a relationship. And another one is, do you have sleep disorders? So that's again a common trait for ex-boarders. Or another one is getting easily stressed. So again, that's something that she shows. Those are essentially, some of the things I've seen in that film with her, and I think it's very brave of her. At the end, she gets in some of her friends from the school, and they kind of talk over stuff which has come up, and they talk about a lot of these issues, talk about trauma, they talk about CPTSD, which is interesting. In the film, this woman writes down PTSD as one of the things that she got from boarding school. And then later on it's changed that she's got CPTSD. I've just come across this recently, realizing that this is a core trait of ex-boarders, is CPTSD. Not only have we received the trauma, but we've not then been able to escape. And that, if you look at, say, mind.org.uk, I'll put a link in the bottom of this video, you can see the description of what they talk about. It's a mental health charity saying about complex post-traumatic stress disorder is when, you know, you're not only traumatized once, but over and over again, and you can't escape. And this is what has happened for Paris Hilton. She can't escape. And the same with most boarders. You get the sense that, oh yeah, you can leave. But in my school, very few people left, even though they were being bullied and tormented. And those that kind of did leave was either through suicide or through being expelled. You didn't just normally leave. So I see that really, she talks about that, and a lot of the women talk about it who went to her school, that they have CPTSD. So I think, yeah, it's very brave that she's speaking up and bringing this to light, that boarding school, especially in America and Canada, the First Nations were sent off to these horrible boarding schools where the most horrific things happen to them. Seems to be this, and the same in America. And I know some First Nations who went to boarding school, and one of them was sharing that he kind of walked 200 miles to try and escape, and they found him, brought him back, and eventually he was taken abroad. But I think it's really brave of her to speak up and to share so openly. And I've certainly changed my perspective of, rather than seeing her as just a social media person, that she's got some real guts to speak up and share about this. So the last bit for me that I want to just talk about is that one of the women towards the end of the film talk about that it takes, she says, it's about 15 to 20 years after you've left boarding school that you start to process stuff, and you go, oh my God, boarding school wasn't quite as good as I thought it was. And a lot of my problems in my life, not all of them, but relate to what happened at boarding school. And these women come together and they share, yes, of course. And while I've noticed that a lot with my clients. It's like get to about 40 and they go, oh, actually I've got a few issues here which still need to be dealt with. So yeah, these are just some reflections about the Paris Hilton documentary and how that relates into boarding school syndrome. So on my website at piers-cross.com, I do have the list of all these questions. So if you feel, I went to boarding school and I'd like to look through them, or you just want to relate that into the documentary and maybe look through the documentary again and just see, I can really see how that relates into Paris Hilton's behavior and how she shares. So if people have any questions about this, maybe there's other well-known people who've been to boarding school and they've done such documentaries, then please do share. Please feel free to comment below if you found this helpful, and if you're drawn to sharing it, then that's wonderful too. So hope this has been helpful, and real blessings to Paris Hilton. May she find healing from her boarding school syndrome. So take care, be well.